again, you're a North guy. You
Hmm.
were there. You're very familiar with the run, the heyday, what wrestling means to that school. I'm making the case here that this might be the most dominant run in Nebraska high school wrestling history. So I'm going to start there, but I'm going to
Yeah.
ask, how differently would we think of Tyson Terry as a recruit and a prospect if he hadn't committed so early?
That's a good question. Probably, if it had been more drawn out, there's always, I think, more fanfare around it when that person does end up committing. So you're absolutely right. Whenever a kid announces when he's like 16 years old, we sometimes take for granted how talented that guy is. And yes, I do think if he completes it this weekend, you would have to say it's up there, and I would say the most dominant performance in high school history because he's done it all as a heavyweight, which
Yeah.
is incredible to come in as a freshman at that weight and dominate like this. It's a special thing for me to watch because I did go to North High, but I also was I wouldn't I don't want to act like I was best friends with Ryan Terry, his father, but I knew that circle and I covered that team in 1999 when Ryan Terry was a sophomore and when he won state
Yeah, he was
and
at 52.
yeah,
Yeah.
and Ryan Terry, his father was an incredible wrestler, and that team, coached by Curly Alexander and those guys, it was just dominance to the fullest degree. So whenever I see North guys do well, that means a lot to me, Damon. And Tyson Terry has been someone who he could have went anywhere for school too, I'm sure. And they were very loyal to North, and he's had some amazing results for that program, and I know it means a lot to that community.
BC, I also wonder, DB mentioned how much we'd view him differently if his recruitment played out differently. I also wonder how we'd view him as a recruit if he was from like South Dakota or Missouri instead of Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like because we talk about kids, like, would we just talk about him the same way we were excited about Nash? Because I feel like sometimes we kind of knock kids, especially local kids that do commit early and don't really give them their flowers.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ravi. The Polar Bear had an incredible wrestling career too, and was pinning guys in like 10 seconds. But what Tyson's done on the mat is equally as impressive to me. And I always am just awestruck by those guys who are great wrestlers because think about, to me, it seems like an incredible amount of pressure on your back to go out there 166 times so far. And everybody expects you to demolish this person in front of you. And if you lose, I remember the Iowa kid like a couple years ago who was going for like 4 championships and his mom broke her glasses and stuff like that, and just the reaction to that sort of pressure like on those kids to keep a streak going, it just seems so immense to me. So when I see a guy go out there and just back it up week after week like Tyson does, I think that says a lot about their mental toughness. Obviously he's gifted and he's favorited in all these matches, but you still have to be really mentally strong to go out there and just not give in ever and have that one slip. And so that's an incredible thing to watch.
I won't dominate your time with TNT, but I do want to give him his flowers. And I remember, I can't remember what basketball game was I supposed to be going to in Lincoln? Was it
Mm,
Illinois? Anyway,
yeah.
there's a wrestling tournament in Lincoln at the same time as the Illinois game, and there's just this collection of guys from the football team currently at Nebraska that all wanted to go watch wrestling. And I was thinking at the time, he's kind of innocuous. But then as guys kept showing up and kind of sitting in the corner with Ryan and spurring him on, I'm thinking to myself, these guys are older than TNT. And I get it. There's the Donovan Jones
Mm-hmm.
Caleb connection. So those guys are riding regardless. But to bring all these other guys with them, and they want tickets to state this year, like the camaraderie and the chemistry, I think can't really be understated when Coach Rhule's talking about the kinds of people that he wants to bring into the program, or the kinds of people that he needs to make up the 105, or the kind of people that he wants to love and support the state and think as highly of the University of Nebraska as he does. I mean, Tyson kind of embodies all of that in one with how guys kind of gravitate towards him.
Yeah, I don't think that's a small thing at all. When I see Caleb post a picture of the guys like after one of Tyson's meets, and there's like 6 or 7 guys, I'm always drawn to that. I feel like it does, because I do think sometimes on certain teams there can be class distinctions. This guy's a year or two older, and you're not really you're kind of like, well, he's not at my stage yet. Even if there is a friendship that went back when you were younger, I think it's awesome. Obviously, I know Caleb and those guys have a deep friendship, but there's other guys who have been drawn into that, as you say, and they're just as supportive. And I think that does speak for good chemistry. And it also probably speaks to Tyson being the type of kid that people just like to support. And let's not forget, he started this wrestling season injured. I mean, he
was not good.
He got hurt at the end of the football season, and there was some question like, when was he going to get on the mat? And I remember at his signing day in December, he said, "Oh, I'll be out there next week." And so, I was thinking to myself, like, oh man, is that going to like put the streak in jeopardy? Is he going to go out there and like lose one while he's kind of getting it back? And no, he's just picked up where he left off. So no offense to all the others wrestling against him this week. I wish them well after this year, but I hope Tyson Terry completes the mission.
BC, it's kind of funny because as we talk about Tyson Terry and, brought Nash up a little bit, like if I were a line coach in college, I would recruit as many wrestlers as I possibly could, because those guys are like just straight up psychos, first of all. And then secondly, their ability to like use their body and their leverages is incredible. Like if they were a Division I quality player, I would go to wrestlers every day of the week.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. Malik Collins was one of my favorite Huskers, and he was a wrestler and really gifted on the mat. And I think you saw how he's used his leverage to survive in the league for a long time. Justin Evans is a kid who was a really good wrestler. And if you talk to like Ty Robinson and those guys, they'll say he was one of the most difficult guys in practice to go against because he's so strong and he does have a way to out leverage you and get low on you. And so I think there's a lot to be said for it. I think coaches definitely look for it. I think they like that guys who wrestle put themselves out there one-on-one. It's like it takes some guts to do that whenever you're in a sport where it's just you on the mat and everybody sees the result plain as day. That's why I go back to what I said. When a guy runs the table, I just think that's an incredible feat, because think about like going out there and doing something all the time and it's just you against yourself and executing the way Tyson Terry has. It says a lot about probably his mental toughness then to take that to the football field as well.
As the famed mat drills are just getting started, it's all I can think of about competitive stamina. And embodying competitive stamina, that voice you hear, if you're a little confused, yes, it's Brian Christopherson, but he is competing and being on with us when he is very much under the weather. So, BC, we do appreciate it. So let me get to kind of the hour sit down and Coach Rhule and the consistency. And this is on the heels of the Broyles talk, where that is garnering national attention, kind of brought the room down there. When you look at him transitioning into more of a leadership role with kind of how he's built this staff, how do you feel that plays in the long run in terms of his fingerprints as a spokesperson and an ambassador? How quickly do you think the play has to match his perceived prowess in that other area?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I do think Nebraska needs to take it up like a notch or two where you're in that 9-10 win category. And then rightly so, I think Matt Rhule will, I think he can become one of the great voices for college football, because he is so candid. He has good ideas. He's not afraid to say what's on his mind, or if something's he thinks is off in the sport, or what the reality of the situation that coaches are dealing with. And I think he definitely has a platform already, don't get me wrong. But there is that point too where like he's going to keep coaching at Nebraska and you get to that elite level and imagine what his voice can be like if Nebraska is on that stage, because I think you saw this past week when he talks, people listen. Like if you go watch the interview with Josh Pate and look at the comments below, you'll see people who aren't Husker fans who are like, man, I like this guy. He makes a lot of sense. You know, he just has that way of communicating that I think is really good for the sport. So I think it'd be great for college football if Nebraska gets back because they're one of the traditional powers. I also think it'd be great because I think Rhule's the type of coach who should have a platform that you want to hear from because he's got interesting opinions and he's candid, and not everybody's like that.
Yeah, I mean, and if they start winning a little bit more, then the things that he says won't get overshadowed by dummies like Feinbaum telling him to stay in his lane. I mean, that's what you're talking about, right?
I said this for a couple of years now, BC. If his personality, if they ever start winning, he would just turn into a monster because how much he loves this place and how much he's tried to speak it into existence. If he ever gets proof of concept, I mean,
yeah,
all bets are off. I mean, this guy could be governor in 15 years. Zero campaign.
I mean, just the part where he was talking about giving a post-game speech after losing, like that's fascinating stuff to me. And coaches don't talk about that a lot. But he, on the interview with Pate, he's talking about those crucial 30 minutes right after a game you lose where you have to set just the right tone for a hurting team. You've got to go into a press conference, tell the fan base certain things without burning your team. And you've got to nail that. And you think about the pressure to get that right and how it, merges into the next week and like what you're trying to do going forward. It's just interesting. Like when you get him on topics like that and he can take it and really make you think about like, man, there's a lot that happens. Like after Nebraska lost to UCLA and he goes in that locker room and then the post game and like all the messaging and what he's trying to get across, knowing how much it's going to impact his team the rest of the year. It's really interesting to hear him talk about.
We're talking with Brian Christopherson, Husker247. BC, on February 18th and 19th, did you have on your bingo card that we'd be obsessing over the contract of EJ Barthel?
No, I did not. I was not obsessing. I knew, negotiations happen, and that's the way I always view it. I don't necessarily view that because a guy hasn't upped his contract that means he's not wanted or anything like that. So I think sometimes people take leaps they shouldn't take, and obviously EJ had some people that were interested in him, and he did, I think, what anybody would do in that situation, and he ends up, getting a raise. And the thing I go back to is in December, Dana Holgorsen said in a press conference, I like this staff. I like who's around me. He wanted to Keel Shorts because he knows how good he is and how much he fits his system. But everybody else, he said, I like what they're getting done, and they've kind of held pat. So, I mean, when Dana Holgorsen says something, I tend to take him at his word because he is pretty candid.
Yeah.
And that's
one way to put it
about the staff. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think people forget that Coach Rhule, when he announced the full-time hiring of Dana Holgorsen, also announced that he had full-time control over the staff as well. And a lot of us, I think, thought that at the time, oh, well, I guess he does like Marcus Satterfield as the tight ends coach. But we didn't really apply that same logic to EJ Barthel at running backs, which seemed weird. I don't know if it was just that his contract was up or what, but does it seem like people sort of forget that part of the conversation where Rhule said, hey, Dana's going to get to do whatever he wants to with the staff?
Yeah, maybe. And I think some people were kind of locked in on that first week when Dana was blunt about how the running backs weren't hitting the holes, as good in that first half. I think it was at USC. And so people get kind of stuck on that idea, like, oh, he must not think much of Barthel then. And it just hangs in the air, and that's not actually correct. Like maybe Dana Holgorsen thinks a whole lot of how EJ Barthel adjusted and how his guys played after that, and he's like, you know what, I can work with that. So we always have to be careful to assume stuff while things play out. Everybody wants to jump ahead of things now, and just because the hay isn't in the barn on something yet, we kind of will throw out these opinions about what we think is happening, and that's very dangerous to do.
So, BC, let me ask you something, because this has kind of bugged me, not from day one, but fairly early. Why do you think there was or is, or I don't know, present progressive, the disconnect between how Nebraska as a staff and Coach Rhule in particular think of Coach Barthel versus portions of the fan base and even to some degree in the media? Like where do you think the disconnect is over his prowess?
I think outside the walls, there's this sort of discontent, and I understand it. It's like Nebraska's sort of been without that bell cow where you thought they had that just unbelievable running back for a while. And because of that, I think there's just sort of disappointment sometimes around the running back spot until that happens. But when Emmett started to pick it up at the end of last year, maybe he can become that guy. And I think you got to give EJ Barthel some credit for that. I think they've brought in some good recruits. I know others were involved in the recruitment of Jamarian Parker, but so was EJ Barthel and Connor Booth, and Makai Nelson's a guy that he was in on and they still like, and we'll see what Quentin Ives can do. And so anybody who wanted to write the story about how he's done as a coach, I think we're going to learn a lot more in the next year or two with how some of these guys develop that are just coming in, or how they do in 2025. But I do think probably that's what it was. It's just that feeling like, man, Nebraska's supposed to be that place that's running back you, and it just hasn't kind of felt like that. And so there is sort of that sometimes tough critique that goes on when it's not quite like that. So hopefully they can take that step this year. And obviously the people who matter like what EJ Barthel does behind the scenes, and thinks he's a good football coach. And sometimes you got to trust that they know a little bit more than we do and see a lot more than we do.
So it's interesting, BC, because on the heels of you seeing more than what we do, I lucked into a conversation in New York with Coach Holgorsen. And he was talking about transitioning from all his jobs and being particular. And a lot of it started with who he could work with and work for, right? You do it that long, you kind of can pick stuff like that. And there's two things that caught me that were very interesting. I was asking him about Coach Sat and that transition and helping learn the offense and the lingo and vice versa. And he said, one of the things that I think is really understated with Coach Satterfield is how well he works with Coach Raiola in terms of the run game and perimeter blocking. He said their cohesiveness is something that I don't even really have to worry about. And I wonder, and I was like, and you work with guys like that where there's just things about them that that make you guys connect. It's kind of how I felt about Sharp, Greg, where it was like there's things that happen behind the scenes that help with the chemistry that you can't really appreciate without saying it out loud. And conversely, I wonder if we say things like, oh, the commitment to the running game and the running plays and the backs look different. I almost wonder if they have that same kind of connection in the backfield too, where the fit and the style helps with the cohesion. Maybe Coach Barthel is kind of on the same page stylistically with Coach Holgorsen. So maybe that's why it works. The Satterfield thing was super intriguing to me because I think we do undersell that because we don't know it unless he tells us, right?
Yeah. No, that is really interesting. People should remember too that it was Satterfield when they first got here and he met with Raiola. He was like telling Matt Rhule, he's like, we got to keep this guy. Yeah. And so it doesn't. So
they went in with the intent to get rid of him.
Yeah. So, I mean, it does make sense that those two have a close connection and that counts for a lot. And I think you're making a good point there about how, Dana Holgorsen had a couple months to look over the staff and be like, does this guy understand what I want out of my offense? And does he coach him in a way that I think can lead to success? If the answer is yes, let's just keep rolling with it. And when he said that comment in December that I like how these guys coach, I don't know. I didn't see a lot of people really highlight that comment. It stuck out to me. I heard that, and I didn't necessarily think there were going to be all these massive changes on the staff. There were people still in December who were like, oh, they're going to flip out like 3 guys. And I'm thinking, like, I don't know about that, like go back and listen to Holgorsen. And so I don't know. Sometimes you gotta keep your ears open, and that people, they will tell you kind of what's going to happen if you pay attention.
Well, especially guys like Dana Holgorsen. BC, we were talking, DB and I were talking yesterday about kind of this misperception about position coaches sometimes. And I think I landed on, I don't know if I think DB was fighting me on it a little bit, but
probably.
How much of it do you think is just we don't always know what we're looking at, and so we sort of oversimplify, like, hey, if you don't have 1,000-yard rusher and you're not recruiting 4 and 5 stars, you must not be very good at your job?
Yeah, I think that's right, Ravi. And that I kind of gave a discombobulated answer earlier that was hopped up on NyQuil. But
dang, you're a NyQuil guy, huh? The more you know.
Yeah. Mucinex, I think I've tried every one of them. So don't. Yeah. So some of the stuff I say, I don't even know what I'm saying. But I think you're right. Like we don't always know exactly what makes a great position coach, because we don't get to see it behind the scenes. We don't get to see the everyday stuff, how they connect to players. I always remember Matt Rhule saying, sometimes there's an assistant coach that everybody thinks is having a really great year, and I actually think there's somebody else who people are down on that's having just as good a year, basically, with what he's working with and how he's operating behind the scenes. And so you have to, I'm probably naive a little bit, but I always feel like there's so much pressure to win. They've got to get it right. I tend to believe if Matt Rhule or a head coach decides I'm sticking with a guy, there's a very good reason he's sticking with that guy, because he knows what's at stake. I do not think he's a head coach who is afraid to make moves if he has to make them. I think we've already seen that. And so when he sticks with somebody, we should also maybe accept that there's a good reason for that too.
That's our guy, Brian Christopherson. Hey, we appreciate you joining
Competitive
us.
stamina, BC, my man.
That's a cool 38 points in the finals with the flu, baby. We appreciate it.
Thanks, B.